What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Blogger Bowl 2023 season previews. Matt, we got the big boys today. It just means more. The dominant conference in college football, the SEC. The season is upon us for them. A lot to dig into. How are you doing this morning?
I'm great. This has been such a nice treat of a week that I just get to wake up every day and talk about college football all 5 days of the week. Like when we did the superlative show, it was fun, but then it was like, oh, I still have like 3 more weeks. We've had a show every day leading up until Saturday when we actually get real live college football on our screens. I'm getting the itch down. I'm ready. I'm ready to go.
We were talking off air. There's actually, and I'm going to do some digging this afternoon, maybe put it out on the BetSperts Twitter account. There are some NAIA and JUCO games today. So college football season technically kind of does start tonight. And hopefully some of those games will be on digitally somewhere so that we can watch them. So watch some just random ass college football because we are so excited for the season. Just want to give a shout out to my favorite SEC team.
Hook 'em.
The Texas Longhorns, of course, not in the league this year. The last year under the standard format that we've had since Texas A&M and Missouri joined this league. And as we do through these previews, we're going to take a look at the ESPN SP Plus conference power ratings. Again, straight subtraction here. So looking at this, to me, it seems like there's like, 5 tiers in the SEC. You have Georgia and Alabama in tier 1. You have LSU and Tennessee in tier 2. You have A&M, Ole Miss in tier 3. Then you have Florida, Kentucky, Auburn, Mississippi State, Arkansas, South Carolina, and Missouri in their own tier. And then Vanderbilt, poor old Vanderbilt, in their own tier there at the bottom. However, I was talking to someone connected to the Vanderbilt program.
I just saw the bottom.
Very, very high on what they have going on this year, thinks that this is a team that legitimately can contend for a bowl game. So a lot of optimism. I'm excited to watch them play. AJ Swan, their quarterback, he's legit. He's legitimately good. They've got some good skill guys. So Vanderbilt's a team that my one source thinks could maybe get to the 6-win mark, which would be pretty remarkable for what they have going on. But when you look at this, you see Georgia and Alabama pretty much online more or less, and then Georgia about a 6-point favorite over LSU, a 7-point favorite over Tennessee. When you look at this, what stands out?
I mean, I know we talked about this last few days on the show, and a lot of this is reputation based. But I'd like to think that LSU has a reputation of, while they might not be in the top tier with them, like they have that national championship, top 5, top 4 potential team in the country reputation. And everybody seems to be incredibly high on them and kind of has them as their hot pick to go back to the SEC championship game. Kind of surprised to see they'd be 5-point dogs to Bama this year. I would think on a neutral site that would be a little bit closer of a game. Also surprised to see South Carolina as far down as they are. I believe they're a ranked team. Not that the rankings necessarily, preseason rankings matter a ton, but I believe they're a top 25 team. I want to say like 23rd in the country. They have Spencer Rattler coming back. They had a pretty good, I shouldn't say pretty good. They had a very strong end of the season last year, just throttling Tennessee and beating Clemson on the road. I would think you'd have them ahead of teams like Auburn, who's, how do I phrase this? I think Hugh Freeze will do a good job there. I was going to say I like Hugh Freeze higher, but that's not what I meant because he's not a very good person. I think he's going to do a good job there, but they're starting Peyton Thorne this year. We saw what Peyton Thorne did at Michigan State. I think this is kind of a rebuilding, retooling type year. And then next year maybe is when they start to get his guys in. I would think South Carolina is going to be a better team than Florida this year. Kentucky as well. I know Kentucky got Devin Leary, but they have offensive line issues and kind of have for a while now. I would think South Carolina for me is a team that's better than bottom 3 in the SEC.
Yeah, again, we talk about priors mattering here, and South Carolina hasn't been very good. I mean, if you look at all of those teams ahead of them, Florida's not the last few years, but traditionally, I mean, if Florida did go to the SEC
last few years, they've kind of
they went to the SEC title game in 2020, so it's not like Florida's that far removed from being very good. Obviously, Kyle Trask was a Heisman finalist. Kentucky's had some really, really solid years. Auburn's been solid. Yeah. Mississippi State under Mike Leach. Arkansas had a couple years under Sam Pittman. We'll talk about a lot of these teams. I have notes on some of these teams. Not everyone in the SEC interests me, but In South Carolina, their roster is improving, but it's still, it's the SEC. It's all kind of relative. On your point about LSU, you might as well call them the LSU Yellow Jackets this year because the buzz is out of control for LSU. I wasn't even going to go there, but then you talked about how people are high on LSU this year, and we'll talk about them in a second. However, any discussion about the SEC has to start at the top with the two-time defending national champion Georgia Bulldogs. What a world!
The Dawgs
couldn't win one for 40 years, and now they are just
now they can't stop winning them.
Now they're the dominant force in college football. Trying to break this down, the only real things I can think of that might keep this team from winning again, maybe there's some complacency that sets in. Maybe you have some guys standing on the shoulders of giants and calling themselves tall, guys who didn't put in the work that the last two teams did and think that they're just going to waltz in. But Kirby Smart has proven to be pretty adept at helping his team avoid complacency.
Yeah.
And then is there a step down from Todd Monken to Mike Bobo? Mike Bobo, if you look at the macro sense, when he was the coordinator at Georgia a few years ago, the offense put up points, but Georgia fans were always critical of his in-game decision-making, so that's a question. And then is Carson Beck good? We have no idea whatsoever. The thing is, Georgia should have plenty of time to figure things out. South Carolina doesn't have the horses to run with them in Athens. Auburn might in a couple years, but early on in the season, they don't. Florida at least seems like a mess. So November 18th trip to Knoxville feels like the one opportunity in which we might see Georgia really, really pushed this year. But again, there's just an insane amount of talent on this roster. The Mad Lad McConkey's back. Dominic Lovett, Rara Thomas, both transfer in at wide receiver. There's an irony here that people thought Stetson Bennett was a game manager, which he was not. He was a gunslinger. And if Carson Beck can be the game manager people thought Stetson Bennett was, this offense is going to be really good.
It'll be just fine.
Defensively, They just keep churning out players. Again, they have stars at every level. Michael Williams, he's the next top 10 pick on the defensive line for Georgia. Jason Dumas-Johnson at linebacker is one of their leaders. And then Javon Bullard, Kamari Lassiter, Malachi Starks at defensive back. It is an embarrassment of riches for this team. You have to address something with the schedule. And yes, the schedule is very easy. One, they can't play themselves. They play themselves in practice every day, but they don't play a game that counts against themselves. And they had a game against Oklahoma that got canceled when Oklahoma announced they were moving to the SEC, and they had to kind of scramble to replace them. So the schedule's easy. They're loaded once again. This is a team that is going to be in the SEC championship game very, very likely again. They're very, very likely going to be in the playoff, and they very, very much should be right back in the mix to win their third straight national title.
I mean, Georgia is the new Bama. Like they've kind of become that factory, and not that Bama kind of can't get back to that point or won't at some point. Well, that remains to be seen, but they certainly can. The good thing with Carson Beck is like you said, like he has as much time as he pretty much needs to learn on the fly. Could the South Carolina game at home somehow get tricky after playing? I think that's their third game of the year after playing two cupcakes, maybe, but still probably not. They're still a significantly better football team than that. And I think that's kind of the first time where you're going to see them somewhat tested. But yeah, I mean, you look at the schedule. I mean, after that, it's UAB. Then they go to Auburn. Auburn's a weird place to play, and that's a rivalry game. But like that, Peyton Thorne's not going to beat Georgia. I would be absolutely stunned at that. The rest of their schedule, like you said, is a mess until we get the newest game of the century when they go to Knoxville, and that one should be an absolutely awesome, fun game. I would hope Tennessee is at the level where they can give Georgia a game there, but they just replace everybody. It's just a factory. That defense, like we saw with last year, replaces 8 starters. They're every bit as good. They're going to play starters again, be as good. Carson Beck's going to fill in, and I think he's going to be really good too. And they should have playmakers on every side of the all over the field, on every side of the ball. And they probably have the best football player in the country, not named Marvin Harrison Jr. and Brock Bowers. It took us this long to mention that guy's name, but he's back. I guess, what did you call him the other day? He's not a man. He wasn't a human. He was a monster, something like that.
I don't remember what I said.
Yeah, something like machine, maybe it was.
He's not a man. He's a machine. That's actually,
there you go.
That
was a Rocky IV quote.
It's also a wrestling. There's a guy in pro wrestling who does it. Yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say. I mean, last year the question was, could they build upon it? Was it a 1-year thing, or could they build upon it? They proved they did. They proved they're the dominant team, and now pressure is on everyone else to catch up, which means as we pivot to the number 2 team in the SEC, I think this is the most interesting Alabama has been in a very, very long time. I wrote in my notes deep sigh, so okay, I'll be the guy. I think Bryce Young covered up warts on this team last year. The beauty of what Nick Saban has done for so long at Alabama is that again, we talk about machines. Alabama was a machine. You lose players, you replace them. You lose coaches, you replace them. And there's never really been a drop off. Last year, for me, watching them eye test was the first time it really felt that Alabama was reliant on one player. Like one player was above the system. That one guy was not replaceable, and that was Bryce Young. They played within the margins last year. Yes, the losses were close, but they had close wins. 10-2 was a fair result. And now they're going to try to do this thing where they shift from being a pass first offense to going back to the old Alabama of ground and pound and play good defense. The problem is the offensive line has been regressing in its run blocking ability since Kyle Flood left. Football Outsiders has three main run blocking metrics: opportunity rate, which is the percentage of carries that gain at least 4 yards, power success rate, which is basically success on third and fourth down and short, and then stuff rate, the percentage of carries by running back stopped at or before the line of scrimmage. Alabama's proficiency in all of those areas has steadily declined over the last couple of years since Kyle Flood went to Texas. So this idea that Alabama is just going to be able to flip it on its head and run the ball successfully at people the way that they did years and years ago is interesting to me. I think the jury is still out on Tommy Rees as a coordinator. If Jalen Milroe gets the starting quarterback job, can he develop into a proficient passer? We know how good he is with his legs, but can he be the passer that they need him to be? Are they going to develop a great Alabama level receiver? Jermaine Burton, Ja'Cory Brooks are both very good players, but they're not the caliber first round pick that we've ever seen, that we typically see from this Alabama team. So if Nick Saban can reinvent Alabama once again, they reinvented after they lost the title to Clemson. They said, we're going to become more modern. We're going to throw the ball a lot. And they put some of the best offenses we've ever seen in college football. They're now reinventing themselves again to kind of go back to the way they were before. And I just don't know that they are geared up to do that. That said, again, when I talk about levels to these things, that doesn't mean they're not going to be a top 10 team. I just wonder if they're going to finish the season as a playoff caliber team or if LSU can get them again in that conference, because I just wonder about some of the changes.
Yeah, I think all the points you made are fair, and I think they do have a lot of changes coming. Obviously, Bryce Young, I would agree with you. I'd take it a step further. It's not that I'm not sure if Bryce Young covered up a lot of warts for them last year. I'm positive Bryce Young covered up a lot of warts for them last year, and he won them some football games that they definitely don't win without him. I just think last year might have also been a little bit of an eye-opening wake-up call to Nick Saban and that coaching staff that, hey, certain things do need to change. They made changes at both coordinators. Maybe not the defensive coordinator. I forgot he had been there before. He came from Miami, right?
Kevin Steele is a guy who's been around a million.
Yeah, but he was at Bama like prior, Auburn.
If I'm not mistaken, he was Saban's first defensive coordinator at Alabama.
Okay,
he's one of those guys who, if you look at his profile on Wikipedia,
he's been everywhere.
Coaching stops, it's everywhere. He was the guy who led the coup against Brian Harsin at Auburn a couple years ago. Like, Kevin Steele is a guy who has been around the block.
He's been everywhere.
Yeah.
Tommy Rees is somebody who watched just about every snap he called last year as the Notre Dame offensive coordinator. I do think at times he gets a little bit bored with what's working, but I don't think Nick Saban is someone who will let him get out of line and let him get bored with what's working if what's working is working. And he had pretty darn good success figuring out an offense last year with I'll call it fairly inept quarterback, not many weapons surrounding them, but running backs on an offensive line. And the offensive line last year was an issue for them, but I truly think that that's something that they can get back on track. And I don't, if they can't run the football successfully, consistently for two consecutive seasons, I'll go down with that ship, but I think they'll be able to right that. And I think defensively, they bring back a lot of talent in the secondary. Obviously, Phil talked about Caleb Downs, a super recruit, entering that starting 11, whatever, as a safety. I think that turnover luck is bound to bounce back for them this year. Who was the team we were talking about who won a bunch of coin flip? I forgot who we were talking about. Won a bunch of coin flip games last year, but Alabama won a lot of coin flip games. But I think defensively, They lost a lot of those interception, turnover, coin flips that went the other way. I think some of that turnover luck is bound to go back their way. They're too talented not to. They have a first-round pick in a corner in Kool-Aid McKinstry, best name in college football. It's fantastic. I think he's going to have a big year for him. And I think the secondary is bound to take the football away more than they did last year. I know Will Anderson's gone, but they still have some elite edge rushers. Dallas Turner is going to be, the next top 10 Alabama pick that's an edge rusher, whatever. I think they're going to be okay. I think they're going to be fine. I think last year might have been a little bit of an eye-opening wake-up call to kind of what they needed. If losing to Georgia in the SEC championship wasn't enough 2 years ago, I think last year might have been enough of all right, what we're doing isn't necessarily working. We might need to adapt. Because last year going into the season, Saban said it was talking glowingly of that team, saying it was one of the most talented teams he's ever had. Obviously didn't work out that way. And same thing with Belichick and Brady in the old days. Like, I'll be the last one to say that they're, that it's coming to an end. I'll happily be wrong if it is. I think they're going to figure it out. Not necessarily to Georgia's level this year. I still think Georgia's the class of the SEC and wins the SEC, but I do think Alabama getting LSU at home, I think I trust them to get back on track this year.
You look at the week 2 schedule in college football as a whole. There's like a lot of really interesting, like, you're going to learn a lot.
So excited for that week.
But then the headliner of that, which doesn't appear that you would think on the surface wouldn't be that, is the Texas-Alabama game. But it very much is, because if Alabama wants to be the run first, ground and pound Alabama that we're used to seeing prior to like 2015, 16, whenever they made the switch with Kiffin, that Texas game is going to tell you a lot about Alabama, because the Texas defensive line is no joke. They gave up a long touchdown run to Jace McClellan last year in Austin. And then otherwise, Alabama could not run the ball in that game. And Texas' defensive line got better. I mentioned yesterday they did lose a couple of guys, or 2 days ago, they did lose a couple of guys on that defensive line. But the defensive line is nasty at Texas. It could be very, very good, and it's going to be a challenge. And Damani S. says, Bama RBs for Heisman. And he says, if they'll ever hang a line. If you go to Bet Online, I can't really look at legal odds. I don't get them in Connecticut. It's whatever. But on Bet Online, Jace McClellan's 100-1 to win the Heisman Trophy. Honestly, I don't hate the idea. The only team that's had a Heisman winner who wasn't a quarterback in the last since Reggie Bush was Alabama. That said, I'm still a little iffy on it. Moving on to the other team that people think could contend really in the SEC is the LSU Tigers, or the LSU Yellow Jackets. But the LSU Tigers, I want to do this in 2 parts, Matt, because there's a quote that I want to bring up. We'll start offensively for this team. Obviously, Jaden Daniels comes back, but they want him to be more consistent passing. Let's not forget, towards the end of the year last year, his teammates were critical about him not being patient in the pocket and taking off and running too much. But Malik Neighbors, Kyron Lacey lead a receiving core that has 5 players with at least 20 catches back. They have a good offensive line production returning too, but not a lot of depth. I would feel a lot better about Jaden Daniels' Heisman futures and all of that if Garrett Nussmeier weren't still on the roster. Part of me wonders if there's any kind of struggle where Jaden Daniels just doesn't make the improvement if they go to Nussmeier, because there are a lot of people out there who think that Nussmeier might be the best quarterback on that roster. So offensively, what is your expectation for LSU?
That's a great point with the quarterback situation. And talking about coaches I'm familiar with, Brian Kelly isn't necessarily that shy about making a move at quarterback, even if it's a temporary thing at a sign of trouble. If Jaden Daniels is struggling one game, he's not going to really hesitate if he thinks Nussmeier gives them the better chance to win. But they bring back a lot of talent. The running game should be there. They just need to get a little bit more of established running game with their running backs. Jaden Daniels, like you said, gets a little bit run happy in the pocket. Maybe when the first read isn't there, does like to take off. He's going to have to trust the offensive line, trust his receivers a little more. They're going to have to get more production out of their true running game. They have a bunch of running backs. There's a lot of depth in that room. They have a bunch of depth at receiver. They have a really talented group. Now Jaden Daniels has to trust those around him. He has to trust the offensive line, trust his receivers, and actually make the throws instead of just trying to do everything himself.
On the defensive side of things, and once again, I'm just going to put this up there because we appreciate anyone who watches us with any regularity, and you guys are much smarter and funnier than we were. Grabbert posted, he says, the definition of the word predator: 1, an organism that lives by preying on other organisms; 2, a person or group that victimizes or exploits others for gain; 3, Harold Perkins. LSU. That is the perfect description of Harold Perkins. So thank you for that. Harold Perkins is the headliner on this team. They're doing something really interesting with him, though. They've been cross-training him at inside linebacker. What Brian Kelly's the general idea is they want to disguise where he's going to be on the field because teams are clearly going to game plan to try and stop Harold Perkins. So they're going to try to move him around a little bit, put him in different spots so that it makes it harder to kind of neutralize him. That said, a part of me can't help but wonder if you're doing a little bit too much, if maybe you just put him where he needs to be and let him do work. At the same time, we saw teams really worked hard to neutralize Will Anderson at Alabama last year. And when they were
it worked.
Alabama was not able to be as successful on defense. And maybe that's the concern. But I wonder there, the strength of this team is their linebacking core with Perkins, with Greg Penn III, and Omar Speights, who's a transfer from Oregon State, is a guy LSU has been raving about. The problem with this LSU team in general, overall, and particularly on defense, they have talent, but they're not as talented as some of the previous LSU teams we've seen, and they don't have a lot of quality depth. You might have seen the news yesterday. Mason Smith, their defensive tackle, got suspended for the Florida State game because
I didn't see that. That's a big loss.
He and Kayshon Boutte did a autograph signing before NIL took effect, and Boutte got suspended for it last year, and they kind of swept it under the rug. They excused it they said it was an injury or an illness or something. Smith would have served his suspension last year, but he was out all year with a torn ACL. He's a very, very good player. To play devil's advocate a little bit, he's coming off an ACL injury and he's been banged up in camp a little bit. So it's a big injury, but maybe not as big as you would like. To know what you were going to get from him in week one is a little bit iffy, but they don't have a ton of depth. And that's like the defense, how that defense kind of comes together is going to be the trick for them, because there were times last year when their defense kind of let them down.
And they're working in a new secondary too, which is also kind of, if your front seven is a work in progress and still figuring out all the pieces there, that secondary, it doesn't make anything easier on a new secondary that's working together for the first time. Not to say they're not talented, because I think they are. They did well in the transfer portal, but that's a unit that, unless you're just playing straight up man coverage every play, needs to be able to figure it out, needs to be able on the same page, communicate, all that good stuff. The Harold Perkins moving around is interesting. I do understand it. It's similar to what Brian Kelly kind of did with Jalen Smith his last year at Notre Dame, and it did seem to work there. But at the same time, I do tend to, I don't mind moving around it a bit, but like more oftentimes than not, you have to just line him up at edge rusher and tell him go get the quarterback, in my opinion. I think they still will do that, but especially when you have a secondary that's going to be, getting things together early on, you have some moving pieces in and out, you have some depth issues defensively, you do just need to let your best player go do what he does best at most of the time. I'd have no problem disguising it here and there, but it should be like a 75-25, hey, line up, go get the quarterback type thing.
Exactly. And with the quality of linebackers they have with Penn and Speights, you might be able to continue just to let Harold Perkins cook. We'll see if they actually do it. We'll see if it's lip service. Well, that's going to be kind of one of the interesting things to follow in that Florida State game. Where is Harold Perkins lining up? What does Florida State try to do to neutralize him?
That's going to be such a fun game.
The beauty is we'll talk about that game next week, because we will be in week one. The fourth team in the SEC that people are talking about, the fourth best team in this league, the Tennessee Volunteers, off a season that was pretty much a dream. Even though they lost the Georgia game, they got their first win over Alabama in forever, and things were going great. And then the Hendon Hooker injury happened, and it completely derailed things. That said, they did end on a high note, going to the Orange Bowl and kicking the ever-loving shit out of Clemson. And so the Joe Milton hype begins in earnest. It is the Joe Milton experience in Tennessee. If you know nothing about Joe Milton, just know that Joe Milton has maybe the most electric arm in college football. That said,
every time I think of Joe Milton, I think of that Seinfeld clip where Frank Costanza is describing Jay Buhner to Mr. Steinbrenner, and he just says, he's got a rocket for an arm. That's just all I think about with Joe Milton.
The problem with Joe Milton is you never know where that rocket arm is going to throw the ball. Sometimes he's going to throw it to his guy. Sometimes he's going to throw it to a guy on the other team. Sometimes he's going to throw it 3 rows into the stand.
20 yards over both of their heads.
Exactly. You never know where it's going to go. He did get the job a couple years ago at Tennessee, and then he got hurt. But I was talking to a buddy who is really really into Tennessee football, someone who's really smart about Tennessee football, and he said that the Joe Milton injury wasn't that severe, and it kind of felt like that Heupel regretted giving Milton the job and felt that Hooker had a better handle on it. So, would anybody really be shocked if Nico Iamaleava, the 5-star freshman, ended up taking over at quarterback at some point? Talked again to my buddy at Tennessee, and I threw out I said, I talked about how a couple now offshores have Arch Manning. Will he start this year? Like 0 to 1, like not at all. 1 to 2.
Do they have that up with Nico?
Take over as a starting quarterback, basically.
Do they have that up with Nico?
And they don't. And I asked my buddy at Tennessee. I said, is it a better bet for when will Nico start than when will Arch Manning start? And he said 100%. Nico is a big time talent. He's a much more college ready. So I'm interested to see if the Joe Milton thing doesn't work out the way everyone does think it could or will, if they make the switch. That said, the system is awesome. And yes, they lose Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt, but Brew McCoy is back. They pulled Dante Thornton, a great portal get for them from Oregon. So the offense should be able to do a lot of the things they did last year, depending on how consistent Joe Milton is. The question for Tennessee is always going to be, do they have a limited defensive ceiling because of the tempo at which their offense plays? The offense plays at the speed of light, and that's got to be tough on any defense. They were really good at havoc plays. They were great at getting after the quarterback last year. But when they didn't, they gave up points and yards and bunches. They gave up 63 points to South Carolina. Like, that says all you really need to know about the bottom end of what the Tennessee defense can do. So at the end of the day, the question is going to be, do they have enough depth on defense to make up for an offense that plays at the speed of light? And can the style of which they play beat Georgia?
Man, that's such a great. I mean, yeah, it can. They just it has to be similar to Alabama, where they kind of have to catch them on the right night, and everything has to fall their way. But this game is so much later. It's 3 weeks later than the Alabama game was in the season. So my question is, at that time, like, is Tennessee? Is this the same? Is that the same game for Tennessee if they're a 2-loss team than if they were undefeated going into the Alabama game? That's kind of the question for me. And I don't think it would be. And I think if that's the case, Georgia probably comes in there and wipes the floor with them. But we've seen the upside. We've seen the upside with Josh Heupel's offense. Hendon Hooker was a transfer who washed out at Virginia Tech. It's not like he came in, was this guy who lit the world on fire. Like, Josh Heupel kind of molded him into that. And obviously he had to follow suit and do the job, but like, he did, thanks to a great coach and a great scheme. I'm hoping he can kind of do the same with Joe Milton and recreate that magic. But like you said, like, Joe Milton's more of I don't want to call Joe Milton a finished product, but more of, we kind of know more what he is, because I feel like we've seen a little bit more of him. He had pretty much the full year at Michigan, and he wasn't really all that good. He's had chances at Tennessee and kind of lost the job there to Hendon Hooker. Granted, Hendon Hooker would have been a Heisman finalist. Does he not tear his ACL? I'm fascinated to see if Josh Heupel's the guy that can rein in the potential on Joe Milton, because the ceiling's through the roof with Joe Milton with the potential he has, but the floor there you go. The floor is, I don't know, below the foundation. That's how low the floor goes with Joe Milton. So if anything, Tennessee, similar to last year, like anything, Tennessee football should be a lot of fun to watch this year, for good. And if you're not a Tennessee fan, for good, for bad, there's going to be a lot of fun stuff, a lot of entertaining stuff that happens. And yeah, it's a really good point you said to their defense. They got to build depth there, because if you're going to be a team that runs this run and gun offense that's sprinting all the time, that wants, as many plays as they can in a 2-minute period, that's fine. But you need to have 20 guys that you feel comfortable on a given Saturday rotating in defensively, because it's too much to ask of your defense.
And if the Joe Milton experience doesn't work, I mean, we might just, like I said, see Nico Iamaleava. I only said that because I worked really hard to try to pronounce that name. I wrote down.
No, you got to get your reps in too, which is good. Like, the more you say it, I haven't even tried to say it. I'm not going to try and say it until he starts. I'm going to bank on that not happening.
It's like, once I practice,
a terrible strategy.
Like, when I go a while, like a day without practicing it, it's daunting. And then I say it a couple of times, Iamaleava, and I'm good.
I'm just going to call him Nico. He's just Nico.
I wonder if he's going to become Nico I, the way that DJ Uyunglele is just DJU now. A game I'm going to put
DJU has more of a ring to it than Nico I, though.
It does. He's just going to be Nico. It's like Tua was Tua, Nico is Nico.
Nico is Nico.
This is probably not a great cover. Never mind. The one thing I'm going to put a game on the radar. I've got to let me see how quickly I can get to it in my if I can find it in my magazine. This is terrible. The game
Phil Steele's preview.
I got my Phil Steele mag right here.
Hell
the
yeah.
Game that I'm most interested in for Tennessee. Another thing that I'll mention. I was going to save this for the other team. Not the game I was thinking of. Yes, Florida's not very good. However, since they went to divisional play in the SEC, Tennessee is 2-14 in the swamp.
Yeah,
so
it's just weird shit happens
for them. But I'm actually interested in the game after that. A game Tennessee will win, but they play UTSA the week after they play Florida, and that's just like that's
a really tricky spot for them because
UTSA
is becoming
the week after.
You could argue that Florida might be the worst team they play. No, that's probably not true.
I don't think so.
You could argue it though.
You could. I have notes on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more teams. So pick a team in the SEC you want to talk about, and we'll see if I have any notes.
Let's talk about Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss.
Hey, that was the next team on my list.
I figured because they were next on the S&P list, I think. S&P Plus list.
That's probably why I did it. All right.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny that Ole Miss has 3 options at quarterback with Jackson Dart, Spencer Sanders from Oklahoma State, and Walker Howard from LSU, because it shouldn't matter at all who plays quarterback for that team. Quinshon Judkins is that dude. They have 4 offensive linemen with a ton of experience back. So their run game in particular could be good. Pete Golding left Alabama kind of like a go on, get out. Wasn't like necessarily like, oh, I'm taking this job. It's kind of like, well, please go.
You can go now.
He takes over the defense. They collapsed over the final 7 games on defense. They allowed 35 points per game over their final 7 games. Remember, they got off to the hot start with a light schedule, and then it kind of just went woo.
Yeah, they got to they were like a top 10 team at that one point.
Yeah.
Then
and then it just
I forgot who they had like a big game against somebody but it was also another cupcake that they ended up losing. I forgot, and then it was whatever.
Yeah. It's so defensively they're going to have to improve a lot.
They play Tulane. That's awesome. So I didn't realize that week 2 at Tulane.
Yeah,
yes.
Their schedule is not super favorable. They have at Alabama and then LSU at home back to back. They have A&M at home and then at Georgia back to back. And as you mentioned, they can't sleep on that Tulane team.
No.
They might be pretty good, but the schedule is going to be tough. And I just I don't know if I talked about this last year. I don't know if Lane Kiffin is a serious enough human being to be an elite coach in college football. Like, he is very clearly as offensively gifted as anybody in the sport, maybe the most offensively gifted as anybody in the sport. But man, it just seems like the idea of trolling people on Twitter and being very online matters a lot to him. And it's
he's
just
Gen Z's head coach, Dan. You just don't get him.
He's matured over from where he was years ago, but I just don't know if he's serious enough as a coach to really take Ole Miss beyond what they are. That said, maybe there is no taking Ole Miss beyond what they are. Hugh Freeze was kind of cheating his ass off while he was there. So yeah, I think they're going to be good. Patrick says, hold on. Why is my mouse just crapped out on me? There we go. He says, Auburn at LSU and at ATM, the final 3 before the bye, and versus Alabama coming out of it. Life in the SEC West. So yeah, I mean, it's a tricky schedule depending on how good A&M is, and I mean, at least we get to watch Quinshon Judkins again, and that dude's a monster.
Yeah, I mean that's what they have going for them, right? Do we know who's going to win that quarterback job? I would assume Spencer Sanders.
I think Jackson Dart head start that he had over the other guys. I think it's Jackson Dart. Talk about all this. I'll do a little quick Twitter research and see what I can.
I mean, the good thing they have going for them is they have Quinshon Judkins coming back, and excuse me, I know you mentioned that, but and a very good offensive line, and everything they want to do and are going to do starts and ends with them. We talked about Tennessee's defense not being on the field too often because Tennessee likes to go. The good thing about having Quinshon Judkins and an elite offensive line, you can slow things down. You can control the pace of the football game. You can keep your defense off the field, keep them rested. It's going to be a tough go with the schedule, but I think you made a good point there with Lane Kiffin just kind of knowing what Ole Miss is. Ole Miss is a team that here and there, they're going to have a really good year where everything falls into place, and they're going to have a chance to knock off the big boys in Bama and LSU, and maybe they will. But if they don't, they can keep winning 8, 9, have their occasional 10-win season. and be just fine as a program. And I think that's okay. And I think once you see the playoff expand to 12 teams, that's going to be really beneficial for them because they're going to have more options where they can be the third team in the SEC West and still have a chance to make college football playoff if they have a good enough year. So they're going to be, I don't know if I want to say fun to watch this year, but Quinshon Judkins is going to be worth the price of admissions at least.
Oh, Patrick, the schedule I read was from last year. Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean, the schedule was tough last year. It was tough on the back end. It's tough on the front end this year because there's that Alabama game. The Alabama LSU stretch is early. The Tulane stretch is early. As far as the quarterback thing goes,
geez, yeah, that's like week 4 and 5 for them.
Yeah, it's like, and the Tulane game's week 2, and Tulane again not a pushover. So like, Ole Miss is not going to be the team that sneaks up on people the way they did last year. Okay, I thought
no.
Okay, Patrick confused me. Thanks, Patrick. I'm just going to blame Patrick for me being an idiot.
That's fair.
They haven't officially announced who QB1 is, but everything that they've been putting out on social media seems to indicate that Jackson Dart's going to be the guy. So
isn't it weird that Spencer Sanders and to a lesser extent Walker Howard both transferred there?
The Spencer Sanders one is super.
That would make Spencer Sanders could have stayed at Oklahoma State, obviously, but like he could have transferred to a whole lot of different places and started. He was a bigger quarterback name in the transfer portal. He transferred somewhere that he's going to be a backup. That move made no sense unless the NIL offer was like just way too good to pass up, which also wouldn't make sense if you were bringing in a guy to be your backup quarterback.
I don't know.
It's like I know nobody really has an answer outside of that program, but like
and I have no
it was just always a very weird situation.
The next team, I'm just going to go in this order. The next team is one of the most interesting teams in all of college football this year, every time we do it with Jimbo Fisher in College Station. It's the Texas A&M Aggies. No matter what, it's going to be very hard to look away. To be complimentary of the Aggies, which is not something I want to do, they do have a lot of talent on this roster, and it's very young, a lot of that talent still. But Connor Wegman showed a promise. Evan Stewart was awesome last year. And Ruben Owens is one of the top running back recruits in the country. He could make an instant impact. So skill position guys should be good. Defensively, they're loaded with talent. The defensive line has so much talent. Can they become a consistently dominant unit? But the question's going to be the battle of egos running the offense in College Station, because you have two very egotistical, very strong personalities in Jimbo Fisher on one side and his offensive coordinator, Bobby Petrino, and nothing that Jimbo Fisher said about how this relationship is going to work makes you feel any better about them ever being on the same page here. So Bobby Petrino is a brilliant offensive football mind. He's also someone who is just one of the biggest snakes in the grass in the history of the sport of football, and he is very liable to blow things up if he doesn't get his way. So either this team is going to be very good and all of that young talent comes together and they're going to be fun to watch, or they're going to be a train wreck and they're going to be fun to watch in another the opposite side. The schedule, the Miami game is big. We talked about it yesterday. That's a big, we're going to find out a lot about one of or both of those teams, but they have a stretch this year. Arkansas at home, Alabama at home, at Tennessee, bye week, South Carolina at home, and then at Mississippi. Like, that's really, really tough. Like, Arkansas, I don't think Arkansas is going to be very good. Maybe we'll talk about them next just because I went there. Obviously, Alabama and Tennessee back-to-back is brutal. And then you come off of a tough stretch, ending it at Mississippi. They end the season with LSU. Oh, man, like, the AD came out and said, like, there's no hot seat or anything like that. Of course, I mean, with the buyout, who knows? But it's just going to be fascinating whatever happens.
I mean, there has to be a hot seat because I don't think Jimbo can survive another 5-7 season, especially if they go into this and the offense does look a little bit more like Bobby Petrino's offense and that offense performs, but the rest of the team around them kind of doesn't really, and they end up going 5-7 or 6-6 or even 7-5. And you mentioned Bobby Petrino's, let's call it sketchy history and past. There's no doubt that he's, going behind Jimbo Fisher's back and talking to the AD and saying, I can do this better than he can and give me a shot and I'll be cheap. You pay off his buyout and I won't be that much more expensive. Give me a look, all that kind of stuff. Would not shock me at all whatsoever. Like you said, it's the same story as last year. It's, can they get all this young talent that on paper is better or as good as or better than anybody in the country. Can they get it all to work together? Can they fit the pieces together? And last year was just an absolute disaster. Part of that was because they couldn't figure out the quarterback position. It did seem like at the end of the season, Connor Wegman took that mantle and ran with it. He's back this year, but he's got to be that guy again, because if you start out with quarterback questions, that is with a team as fragile and capable of causing fireworks, let's call it, at A&M. If the quarterback starts off on the wrong page and there's question marks there, that's things are going to snowball downhill from there for them. So that has to be the one thing that works out. They're going to have to run the football. Ruben Owens is going to have to step in and be that guy right away, or else things can go bad quickly. So it needs to be a good start, or else things are going to be a spiral. And that's what we talked about yesterday with the Miami game. This team has a huge potential to be a, oh no, here we go again thing. If they're 1-1 with a loss to Miami, even though it's a difficult road game, there's going to be a lot of whispers of, oh shit, here we go again.
I don't disagree with that. Like, I mean, it's just, I mean, it could go off the rails faster. They could be.
There's just so much. There's so much pressure on so many young players to come in and be those guys right away. Like Connor Wegman, cool. You had 4 games at the end of the year. You're now a seasoned veteran. You have to come in and be right away. Ruben Owens, you haven't really played, but you're a 5-star talent. You need to come in and just we can't be missing a beat. Like, everybody has to perform for it to the level they're capable of to reach the expectations, the unrealistic expectations that are set on them every year. And it's a ton of pressure. Can they handle that pressure? Can Jimbo handle that pressure? He didn't last year. He was terrible at it.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely fair. The only other SEC West team that I'm super interested in is Arkansas. The good news, KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders are back. Bad news, just about everything else. Only
Everybody
9
else is gone.
Huh?
I said everybody else is gone, right?
Yeah. Only 9 total starters are back. They have new systems on offense and defense, and it feels like the cute underdog story of Sam Pittman is beginning to wear off. Remember, his first year and the COVID year, they were a lot more squirrely than people thought. Then in 2021, they were one of the surprisingly good teams in college football, and they had an identity of just smash mouth, run over you kind of football. But now it kind of feels like the shine has worn off, and we're beginning to wonder if that was sort of a flash in the pan, if he's the long-term option at Arkansas. Just kind of an interesting direction as they're heading toward a situation where next year looks like they're going to be having to play Texas every year again, and then Oklahoma's in the mix.
Yeah.
So just kind of interested to see where this Arkansas program heads.
I mean, yeah, like you said, the good news is they have KJ Jefferson coming back and Raheem Sanders, but like, their defense is still just awful. I think they're going to be able to run the football, but I'm not sure they're going to be able to do much of anything else. And to your point where, the cute underdog story is kind of behind them, that's correct. And they're no longer the team that, like we mentioned with Texas Tech. Texas Tech is a better team when people don't see them coming, when they can sneak up on teams. No one's really doing that with Arkansas last year, because the last couple of years they have established themselves as, a solid college football team. I just don't. I think this is a year where they kind of take a step back. I like KJ Jefferson as a football player, but they just don't have the depth in that program that that the top tier SEC teams do, that some of the mid tier teams do, to kind of replace and reload every year. And when you lose that much depth, I think they're going to struggle quite a bit in the SEC West and really in this conference as a whole.
2 teams in the SEC East that I have notes on. South Carolina. Which Spencer Rattler do you get week to week? Combined for 798 yards and 6 touchdowns in the last 2 games, wins against Tennessee and Clemson. Consistency has always been an issue. Do we have a new, mature, much more consistent Spencer Rattler, or is the Spencer Rattler roller coaster going to go on for year 12 or how many ever years he's been in college?
Year 15 of his college football career is when he officially matures.
They simplified the offense late last season, and that made a difference, but they also have a coordinator switch there. Juice Wells, the wide receiver, is a player I really, really like. Loved him when he was in the FCS level at James Madison. Not a lot back on defense, and we're 123rd in the country in rush EPA per play defense. So maybe not having a lot back on defense might actually not be a terrible thing, but they're going to have to get a lot better quickly to contend. I really, really like Shane Beamer. Seems like the genuine article, seems like the real deal, good coach, guy you want to play for. It's just such a tough place to win. It's always an uphill battle. And even though right now they seem to kind of have more positive momentum than Florida, they're never going to be able to recruit at the level of Georgia, Tennessee, or Florida. So it's just like the uphill battle. But I do really like what Shane Beamer's done there.
I do too. He's done a great job. But it's just a really, really difficult place to win. Like, they're the 3rd team in that. usually the third team in the SEC East are contending for that spot, which where Georgia is, you're never really going to consistently be able to beat them. Tennessee's now kind of replacing or kind of passing them up as well, or becoming that consistent number 2. Florida's still Florida. I mean, if you look at their schedule too, they open up with that rivalry game against North Carolina. They have to win that football game if they want to get where they want to get this season, which is, not only just a bowl game, but last year they were in the Gator Bowl, like an 8 whatever win season. They start at home against North Carolina, then they have Furman, but then it's at Georgia. That's going to be a loss. They host Mississippi State, who brings back Will Rogers. Geez, I can't talk. And some talent there. Like, that's going to be a pretty solid football team. They got to go to Tennessee. That's a pretty tough 3-game stretch that if you're not 2-1 heading into, you have a really decent chance of being like 1-5, 1-4 at the end of it. So that I know we talked a bit about I think we talked about North Carolina in the ACC preview. You said that was going to be a fun game, but now looking at this from a South Carolina standpoint, that's got to be a win for them. That's a really, really important game for the tone of their season, not just because it's the first one, obviously, but because what follows after that Furman game in week 2.
And then the last team I have notes on, the Florida Gators, and my notes are, we're doing the Graham Mertz thing. Cool.
That's it. Like, I don't.
Good news is they only have 3 returning starters on defense. You can say, wait, what? How is that good news? Well, that's how bad that team was on defense last year. It's a complete reset. They brought in a ton of portal guys. Cam Jackson transfers from Memphis. Caleb Banks transfer from Louisville. Guys they think can give them a pass rushing foundation that will help the rest of the defense. My guy at the SEC says he thinks that Trevor Etienne, I don't know why I thought this was funny, but Travis Etienne's younger brother being Trevor.
His name is Trevor. That's awesome. I didn't realize that.
For whatever reason. But he says he thinks Trevor Etienne is one of the most underrated players in the conference this year. So look out for that. I did mention 14-2 at the Swamp against Tennessee since 91. I asked my buddy who absolutely loathes Florida. I said, put on your objective hat here. I said, if they go 7-5 and get one of the scalps, meaning Florida State, Georgia. Actually, I'm going to throw Georgia out. They're not. I mean, they're
not getting Georgia.
If they do, Billy Napier's fine. If they go 7-5 and they get one scalp of Tennessee, LSU, or Florida State, is that enough proof of concept to show that they're moving in the right direction? He said if they go 6-6 and they don't really show their ass in any of those games, he thinks that it's good enough. That's how challenging the schedule is for Florida. We don't know what Billy Napier is. Like, I don't mind the fact that he hasn't gone out and been splashy and gone out and tried to do the Mario Cristobal thing. And like, he's trying to build a foundation, but at a certain point, we need to see that proof of concept. We need to see that there's something there that they can hang their hat on. Probably not going to be this year or next year when their schedules are just absolutely fucking brutal. But the Gators are always a team that are interesting because they should have talent. Who knows?
You have to. Exactly. You have to show signs of progress. I forgot who we were talking about last year, but Florida's going to be a team for me where it's last week or earlier this week, I should say. It's going to be the eye test for me. Like, I need to see it from them. If they can go 7-5, but make it a good 7-5, and like you said, maybe knock off Florida State and look really good at LSU and fall in a tough one, or maybe beat Tennessee at home and give Georgia a decent game for a little while before Georgia pulls away. Whatever. We have to see more signs of progress. And that doesn't necessarily have to be winning this year, which is a really weird thing to say about Florida, but they have to start showing signs that like you said, what Billy Napier's doing there is improving, that he's building something. They need to start competing in those games. They did it at Tennessee for a bit last year, but they really fell off towards the end. We'll learn a lot about them right away too, going into Utah to open up the season against a team that's probably going to be pissed off that they lost to them last year. That's a really, really tough place to play. They can't go into that environment and get absolutely blown out, or have the doors blown off and lose by 20 whatever points. I'm worried about the Graham Mertz experience. I know at Wisconsin they tried to hype him up coming in. He was a 4-star recruiter, one of the higher recruited quarterbacks Wisconsin brought in. He just wasn't very good. Wisconsin also had a great running game to supplement him. Still wasn't very good. Wisconsin had sneaky decent receiver talent around him too. Didn't really do much. Couldn't necessarily, he struggled to beat Jack Cohn out for jobs. I don't know. I just don't see it working out for them. It's a tougher job in Florida. It's a tougher schedule in Florida. It's a new system. Maybe a new system is what he needs to rejuvenate himself. But I just don't see it. That Graham Mertz ain't it.
Graham Mertz's claim to fame is being friends with Patrick Mahomes. All right. So
I would love it if that was my claim to fame.
Yeah, I know. He's buddies. All right, so that basically covers it. I think. Is there anything else that you wanted to address?
I don't think so.
There are only a couple of teams we didn't talk about. Missouri, I don't care about. Vanderbilt, I brought up.
Auburn, I think, is a year or two away from being
Yeah,
relevant in the conference. Like I
that's
said,
weird.
Hugh Freeze is going to do a good. Like, he's going to cheat his ass off, but he's allowed to now because of NIL, and I think he's going to do a good job. He's already starting to get recruits in there, but like that's still, I think, a year or two away. Similar to what we talked about, Graham Mertz not being it.
Right.
Peyton Thorne ain't it. We saw that at
Is
Michigan
he
State
starting,
last
or is
year.
Ashford going to get that job?
I thought from what I've heard or at least seen on Twitter and stuff, it seems like Peyton Thorne's going to be the guy there. So
Gotcha.
Good luck.
Good luck with that. One of the teams we didn't discuss was my bet. You told me you were doing an exacta. So is that a conference exacta?
It's a conference exacta.
So I'll go first with my bet because yours is kind of overarching conference championship prediction kind of thing. One of the teams we didn't talk about, you brought up briefly, with the Mississippi State Bulldogs. My bet for Mississippi State this year is under 2.5 conference wins at plus 105.
For Mississippi State?
Yeah, Mississippi State.
Okay.
Their conference schedule: home against LSU, at South Carolina, Alabama at home, at Arkansas, at Auburn, Kentucky at home, at A&M, and then the Egg Bowl, which, whatever's going to happen.
Yeah.
The problem they have is the toss-up. 3 of their 4 kind of toss-up-y games, throwing out the Egg Bowl, are all on the road. South Carolina, Arkansas, Auburn, A&M. The only toss-up game they get at home is against Kentucky, and kind of curious what Kentucky's going to have with Devin Leary and bringing back Liam Cohen back to the offensive coordinator with whom Will Levis had his most success at Kentucky. So we'll see. Obviously, there's the sad cloud that's still hanging over the program, the death of Mike Leach. Replacing Mike Leach and what he does on offense is so unique. And I know Will Rogers is back, but Kevin Barbay, their offensive coordinator, he was at Central Michigan 2 years ago. He was at App State last year. Now he comes over to take over at Mississippi State. They want to be more balanced. There's reports that I saw that they're going to try to run some stuff from under center, which Will Rogers has never done. I just think with a defensive-minded head coach, Zach Arnett, in his first year, with an offense that's going to be shifting from one of the most unique offenses in college football, and a really, really tough schedule in the SEC West, I think it's a really big uphill battle for this Mississippi State team to get to 3 conference wins. Maybe they do, but at a little bit of plus money, I think a 2-win conference season is very much in line, and that's a program that I hope can kind of maintain some of the level, but Mike Leach was one of one, and I just don't know that the future, at least in the short term, is super bright for them.
Yeah, I loved Mike Leach, and he was such a fun coach. His teams are always fun to watch, and you do have to wonder if that loss is going to be too much for them to kind of overcome this quickly. And Will Arnett, was it Will Arnett? You say? I forgot. I know it's Arnett.
Zach Arnett.
Will Arnett's the actor. That's why I said that.
Zach Arnett.
I mean, I know Zach Arnett led them to that bowl win last year, but still, that was Mike Leach's systems in place, and it'll be intriguing to see if Will Rogers can overcome the system change for taking a quarterback who had a lot of success in that certain system and kind of ask him to kind of somewhat reinvent himself in his life. I believe this is last year. It has to be. He's been there for 15 years too. In his last year in a system at Mississippi State is going to be a lot to ask. They're going to have a lot of toss-ups and they're going to have to win them. Mississippi State has been a very consistent program. We'll see if they can kind of survive this big, massive, shocking change.
Totally with you.
Hope they can, but it's, like you said, the schedule's a little rough.
You told me you had a conference exacta. I'm very excited to hear this.
Yeah, I'm going Georgia over Bama in the SEC championship game plus 420. It's old, it's boring, but Georgia's going to be there again, and I don't think LSU gets Bama twice in a row, especially this year going back to Alabama. There's questions on both rosters right now. I don't think Brian Kelly's going to beat Nick Saban 2 years in a row. I think Nick Saban's a much better football coach. And have to go do it in
Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I think that's a lot to ask. And if he does, I will be the first one on our show the next week to admit I was wrong. I just think it's going to come down to that game. And I think by that point, it's later in the year, Alabama's going to be clicking, and I think they're going to win that football game. I don't think he loses twice in a row at home. I think Alabama is due for a bounce back year after what they had. I think last year, like I said in their preview, was a little bit of a wake up call for them. I don't see them having that type of, and we're talking about it. I know they could have been 8-4, but they were 10-2. we're talking about a down year for a team that went 10-2. I don't think they have that down year twice in a row, because a lot of it was some talent deficiency, but a lot of it was things they can clean up.
I get it. I mean, I think,
and then I think Georgia will wipe the floor with them in the SEC championship game.
Also not out of the question. I'm just curious about the LSU defense and how they're going to hold up. I mean, obviously we'll find out.
Same.
Just what
I'm so intrigued too by the Alabama quarterback situation.
Me too.
Because it's just I
there's
don't
another
know
thing,
who you go with. Like
there's the other kind of subplot if it does end up being Jalen Milroe, and I'll bring this up. I'll go over this.
If it's Tyler Buckner, I'm going to revoke that bet, and I'll give you a new one. It's not going to be Tyler Buckner.
I think it's going to be Milroe.
I think it will be too.
Jalen Milroe, and the interesting subplot of the Texas-Alabama game is going to be Jalen Milroe and Quinn Ewers, because Jalen Milroe committed to Texas, and then 3 days after Quinn Ewers committed to Texas the first time, Jalen Milroe decommitted and committed to Alabama. So
I didn't know that.
Their history is inexorably linked, and that just going to add another element, fun element to that game. I'll send you a graphic that I made that I'm going to put up if Jalen Milroe. I'll send it to you in Slack. But on that note, we're going to wrap it. We have one more. Phil will be back 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. We're going to talk about, by far, without question, the most interesting conference in college football in the year 2023 tomorrow. We are going to end with fireworks as the foundation of the Pac-12 conference finally collapses upon itself. And
I think my new team is in the Pac-12 this year. How last year it was our Vols. I think my team's in the Pac-12 this year. Now I still like Tennessee, wearing the shirt today, but I think I might be committing to a team in the Pac-12 like I did to the Vols this year.
You're committing to Oregon State. I know it. It's fine.
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay.
I do like Oregon State though. I like them. Are you going to use the buzz joke on them? Are they going to be the Oregon State Yellow Jackets? Okay.
Yep, they are.
That's a teaser for tomorrow.
So on that note, we will be back tomorrow. Like I said, 10:30 a.m. I know we moved the schedule around. This is something we do for fun. We don't get paid to do this, nor should we, but we love college football. We make time in our schedule. So 10:30, me, Matt, and Phil, we will be back to talk about the Pac-12 tomorrow. We cannot wait for that. We will talk to you then.